Hey guys, Sleepy Reader here, Damien, and I'd like to share with you some thoughts on about 8 comics that I've read relatively recently. A lot of them are fantasy comics, not counting my daughter's covers to imaginary comics. Princess Charm School, with the logo attempted to be written by me to look like Perry Rodin book logos. I should have brought the Perry Rodin books out. Anyway, maybe another time. So, I will start out with the Autumnlands, number 7. This is one of my very favorite books every month, on the months it comes out. They just finished a hiatus and are back. And since I last read this, I went to the convention, which some of you may have seen the video where I talked about that, where I saw a panel on Autumnlands and learned all about its origins in Commandy and in Jack Vance's The Dying Earth. All of that makes sense. Another interesting little tidbit that I don't think I mentioned in the previous video is that this hero from the past, from the human past, who's supposed to be the champion who brings in magic, his face is based on G.E. Smith, the guitarist and band leader from years gone by on Saturday Night Live. They were looking for a person who didn't look like he was of any particular race. They were imagining a future from our time where the races were more mixed. And they also wanted him to represent, all humans, not just one particular group of humans, be they black, white, green, or tan. Anyway, I had sort of taken him to be a kind of an American Indian figure. But I found this issue extra satisfying because it focused most of all on the Leroy, that's this fellow's name, Leroy and Dusty relationship. And even though Dusty's the animal, and so kind of reminds one of Commandy's animal friends, in a lot of ways Dusty is more the Commandy-like character. And Leroy is more the animalistic adult character, if that makes sense. Yeah, so there's lots of cool stuff, kind of opening up of a new possible plot element, and just a bigger vision of the world that we're in. You definitely, as I've already in the first 6 issues, felt that they are taking their time with this story. This seems to also signal we're going to take our time, which is just fine by me. Beautiful art, wonderful story by Kurt Busiek. So I say pick up that $10 trade if you haven't already read Autumnlands. If something like this appeals to you, of course. It's not going to appeal to everybody, but it's definitely hits all my hot buttons for fantasy adventure. And speaking of fantasy adventure, probably my second favorite fantasy adventure comic, and someone, I wish I could remember who, a number of videos back asked me what fantasy comics I recommend, and I couldn't remember what they were right when he asked, so I don't think I gave a very good answer. But really, if you're looking at current fantasy comics out there right now, you got Autumnlands, which is kind of this science fantasy, deep future turned into fantasy world kind of thing, and you've got Birthright, which is kind of your cross between the land beyond the portal, where you are the anointed hero, and a horror story and a family story, and it does it wonderfully. This is another great a great episode, or whatever you call it, a great chapter for it. Definitely deepens our understanding of the other world, the fantasy world. A lot of this story has taken place in our world, which has been all to the good, but it's also good now that we're going a little deeper into the fantasy world. And it's brilliantly realized by the artist, whose name I forget, Bresson, and I guess Lucas is probably the colorist. Wonderfully colored. So it really comes alive and was really satisfying to the fantasy fan in me. and the it being framed by the fantasy story in this issue being framed by the people in our world and their complicated relationships to each other just made it all the more interesting. And we get some new twists and wondering about who is the good guy and who's the bad guy when we probably thought we knew for sure who the bad guy was. It now feels a little different. So that's very cool. It just remains a delightful book. Another fantasy book with a different kind of slant, because it comes right out of the Bible, is The God Damned Before the Flood, issue 1, by Jason Aaron, R.M. Guerra, and Giulia Brusco. So I was really psyched for this. It takes place just before the Noah's Ark kind of events, in the wake of the introduction of evil into the world, and how humankind goes sort of crazy with sin and everything. And Jason Aaron really lays it on thick about how horrible the world is. It's basically puddles of crap and of violence and an uncaring world. And our main character seems to be Cain, of Abel and Cain, and apparently he can't die, which is not my understanding of the Abel and Cain story, although Cain was cursed to wander the land. But I was looking it up on Wikipedia, and although there wasn't specifically anything about him being immortal, there was stuff about him living for 760 years, and there's all kinds of apocryphal stuff. It's kind of interesting that Abel, who was loved by God, was the shepherd, and Cain, who was not appreciated by God, was the farmer. So I wonder if that comes from a story written by shepherds. It is interesting that this did send me to Wikipedia, and perhaps I will do a little further research on this, because it's made me more interested in these early Bible stories. Next thing to look into is all the Apocrypha on Noah, because we do get a Noah eventually in here. In many ways, the art and coloring is really good, but there was something about it that kept me from really getting into it, something in the figures and the faces. I wanted something different somehow. I wanted the action scenes to be a little more, I don't know, they just seemed hard to follow what was going on in it. So I wanted something more like a good Conan book where the fight scenes are really exciting to watch. Instead, they're kind of clumsily drawn and chaotic, although obviously very bloody. This really was nothing more than letting us know the setup and having a very bloody fight scene and a bunch of wandering around in the wilderness, and then a kind of tease for someone in next issue. So I felt it was a bit on the nose, a bit just one beat. I still enjoyed it a lot, and I think I'll get the next issue rather than wait for trade. Although I really got to start figuring out which more things to wait for trade on. But this does seem like to have the kind of art, with the double page spreads and stuff, that is really nice in a comic book form. So, and I heard an interview with Jason Aaron where he said that I think about every 6 issues will focus on a different character in this era. And I was raised Catholic and got a good dose of the Bible. We were always taught that the Old Testament was representative of the way people viewed the world at that time, with God trying to slip his message in, and that the New Testament was the more modern, updated view of things. So if you were someone who takes the Old Testament literally and likes it that way, and then you probably don't want to watch Jason Aaron muck around with his version of sort of a mythologizing of some between-the-lines stuff in the Old Testament. But if that doesn't bother you, I think this might be a fun book to follow. Not as good as these 2 fantasy books so far, but still interesting. Okay, I guess 8 House is fantasy. I mean, there's a little bit of a sense of science fiction. Yoris Part 2 by these artists, Phil Barlow and Helen Meyer, who I think are a married couple who have years of working in animation. The first issue they did, the first issue of Yoris, was decent. This issue is a mess and just seems kind of stupid. I can't see where this is going. It connects very poorly to the tone of the previous story. It starts with a biographical note by the artists. It's like you're supposed to like this because of who the artists are, rather than for its own material. It almost felt like. And now I hear that 8 House has been canceled, and the upcoming series, part of series that was by Emma Rios that was going to be part of 8 House, is now going to be on its own. I forgot what it's called. I'm really hoping Arclight comes back and has its own comic. Or, who knows what's going on behind the scenes here. I really don't want any more of Yoris. And sort of in the fantasy vein, my Marvel book that I actually read physically for the week was Doctor Strange #2. I'm still not loving it. There's some clever touches, like the way they do the credits on the cover, with even a little Ditko and perhaps Lee snuck in there. Lee. Very cool cover. There are some cool images, but somehow, I'm almost forgetting what happened in this story. I guess we kind of wander around the house and go through some doorways. So that's kind of a fun idea, but somehow it just didn't gel. There's something for me not gelling between the dialogue and the artwork. But I am committed to 12 issues because I subscribed through Marvel's print subscriptions. That's a really cool image. So hopefully this will start clicking more. Jason Aaron is one of my favorite writers at Marvel. Ironically, the Goddamned is the first of his indie books that I've ever read. Godzilla in HE Double Toothpicks. This is the last issue. There's not much plot at all. There's no words, a few sound effects. Basically, Godzilla wanders through part of hell, sees a gateway, wants to get up to it. There's some kind of creature in it. Some more creatures eat him up, but then all the creatures... I shouldn't give away the rest. It's kind of cool, but it's like a 5-page wordless story spread out onto 20. Amazing art. And that's the end of this Godzilla in Hell. I don't really know what else to say about it. Cool art, almost no story at all. Okay, and then Airboy winds up its 4-issue series. This has been a heck of a lot of fun, and everyone has noticed how at the end the male appendages are back down to regular size. That was a very clever touch. The coloring feels a little too dark here than originally in earlier issues, but a fun ending, kind of on the nose, where just sort of magically James Robinson realizes what kind of writer he should be and how he should be a better person and everything, and that part seems very easily earned. But everything else about this is really great. I love Greg Hinkle's art, so I really want to see what project he gets onto next. I kind of feel like this should have maybe been a 5-issue series. They needed just a little more time to put their characters through their paces and give them a chance to grow. It's kind of, although he talks a lot about being a hack and feeling bad about it, it's kind of a hack plot, the bad person who learns better. And he didn't really find any clever, more literary way to go to handle that. But beyond that, I think I just say that because I heard like iFanboy or someone else, say this stands up with the best of real literature. I put that in quotes because I don't really believe in the concept of real literature. But anyway, I think it's not. It's a very fun book. To me, it's not up at the peaks of literature. Perhaps towards the bottom of literature, but I loved it, is the Rook issue #2. And I've heard some people who really didn't get into this that much. And if you didn't, it's going to probably be even harder to get into issue 2 unless you're a huge H.G. Wells fan and a huge fan of the novel The Time Machine, because this ties in directly to the plot of The Time Machine, and it doesn't explain the plot of The Time Machine, so you kind of have to understand where the pieces of this story fit in The Time Machine, because they happen before the beginning of the story, and then much of it after the end of the Time Machine. If you've read The Time Machine, you may remember the time traveler heads back into the future to go find Weena or go help the Eloi against the Morlocks again. And so we have that all twisted about. And we have the fun of meeting your great-grandfather and all the... I've read so many time travel stories, and this one just has the kinds of twists and turns that I like, but you almost have to have so much familiarity with time travel stories to work out all those twists and turns. Having let go of the Paul Gulacy of the past, I actually like the Paul Gulacy of the present, and it's very well colored. The artist Paul Gulacy. So I'm actually becoming a fan of his current day art, which has simpler layout and just kind of a different vibe than his whole old artwork. So I really look forward to the next issue of the Rook. It's total bubblegum crazy fun, but I guess of the sort where you have to have a bit of that literary history of knowing the story of the Time Machine. Maybe if you've seen the movie, it might be enough, but definitely it relates to the book, not to the movies particularly. So yeah, that's it for now. I have more comics to read, more current and recent comics to read, so I'm sure I'll do another one of these videos in a few days. Ciao, everyone.